Hey guys, tonight we're diving into one of the strangest royal stories you'll ever hear. Imagine a king so obsessed with his dead mother that he made his wife dress exactly like her. Sounds unbelievable, right? You probably wouldn't survive that kind of marriage, but this queen had no choice. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And tell me in the comments where you're listening from and what time it is right now. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The story begins with a boy king. He was crowned young, far too young to really rule, and his mother, his guiding figure, was already gone. Everyone told him she rested peacefully, but he refused to believe she was truly gone. He kept her alive in his imagination, in portraits and jewelry, and in the rituals of his daily life. History shows plenty of kings were shaped by their parents. Alexander the Great carried his mother's influence into every campaign. Henry VIII never stopped wrestling with his father's shadow, but this boy, he took it to another level. Servants whispered he wouldn't eat until a seat was set at the table for his mother, even though she wasn't there. Historians still argue whether that detail is true or just gossip, but it shows how deep the story runs. Picture him at his coronation. The choir sings. The crown is lowered onto his head, and behind him, looming large, is his mother's portrait. Anyone watching would see not one ruler, but two. The living boy and the ghostly mother. It's like a co-throne. Some people said it honored her memory. Others thought it proved he wasn't ready to rule on his own. He filled the palace with reminders, statues in her image, paintings in every corridor. Even her chambers were left untouched, as if she might walk back in at any moment. A quirky little detail. Some courts in Byzantium and Egypt kept relics of queens or mothers as protective charms. It wasn't unheard of. But here, it turned into something heavier. His entire court lived under the shadow of a dead queen. At night, when everyone else went to bed, he would wander those rooms. Some stories say he even tried on her jewelry just to feel close to her. Maybe that's rumor, maybe not. But it paints a picture of a boy who clung to memory like a lifeline. And that's where the trouble begins. When one person rules a kingdom, their private grief becomes everyone's reality. For this boy king, his devotion wasn't just personal, it was political. His courtiers learned quickly, flatter him, and you also flatter her. Criticize her memory, and you might not last long in court. So here he stands. Newly crowned, the crown heavy, the hall full of whispers, and the portrait above him like a shadow he can never escape. Asterisk, asterisk, platters of roasted meat, sweet fruits, and golden goblets fill the tables. But the king hardly eats. His eyes keep drifting, not toward his new responsibilities, but to the portrait of his mother hanging high above the throne. Everyone notices. They just pretend not to. The nobles laugh too loudly, toast too quickly, anything to cover the awkward. Truth. Their king seems more devoted to a painting than to the living people in the room. In medieval courts, symbols mattered as much as actions. A crown's gems, a robe's color, even the seating arrangement all carried meaning. And here's the quirky fact. In Byzantine coronations, emperors often processed with icons of saints. But this king used his mother's image as if she were the saint. Historians still argue whether the portrait's central place was real or exaggerated, but the message was clear. His mother's presence hadn't left the throne. At the table, he pushes food around while humming her favorite hymn. Musicians adjust their songs to match her tastes. Cooks serve recipes she once enjoyed, even though few others care for them. It's not a banquet for a king, it's a memorial service repeated night after night. The courtiers play along. They praise his judgment, but always slip in her name. Such wisdom she surely taught you well. Such strength or spirit must guide you. You can feel their unease. They're flattering two rulers, one alive and one dead. Here's a fringe rumor. Some say the palace corridors were perfumed with her old scent, jasmine and amber, so he could breathe her presence. Whether true or just courtly gossip, you imagine the smell clinging to the walls, impossible to escape. For the boy king, this feels normal. To him, she isn't gone. She's simply ruling in another form. But for everyone else, it's unsettling. Imagine trying to negotiate taxes or treaties while your ruler is waiting for approval from someone who isn't even alive. Foreign ambassadors must have returned home shaking their heads. Yes, powerful kingdom, but their king keeps dining with ghosts. And so the first cracks show. He believes he's honoring his mother, but what he's really doing is building a palace of shadows. Each torchlit corridor, each statue, each hymn keeps the court living under her rule. And the boy, now a king, drifts further into obsession. Asterisk, asterisk, the court expects the king to marry. Alliances demand it, stability demands it, and honestly, everyone hopes a new queen might balance his strange devotion. So the day arrives. Trumpets sound, banners flutter, and the young bride steps from her carriage into the palace courtyard. She's nervous, as anyone would be. New country, new language, new life. What she doesn't know yet is that she's not stepping into her own role. She's stepping into someone else's. The palace walls are lined with portraits of the late queen. Every corridor, every chamber, every corner whispers of the woman she has replaced. The wedding itself looks grand. Choirs sing, nobles clap at the right moments, the crown gleams under torchlight, but the king's attention keeps wandering. Not to his bride, but to the portrait above them. When he slips the ring onto her finger, his eyes flick up, as if asking his mother for approval. Imagine realizing on your wedding day that you're already competing with a ghost. Historically, marriages like this were never about romance. They were contracts, alliances, inked in vows. Sometimes queens didn't even attend their own ceremonies. Proxy marriages meant a stand-in could say the words for them. Our queen at least arrives in person, but she's about to find her marriage comes with strings. No one mentioned Dot at first. She tries. She learns the language, smiles politely, follows the customs, but soon she notices something odd. Her gowns aren't chosen for fashion, they're chosen because they match the styles worn by the dead queen. Her hair is braided, not in her own style, but to mirror the portraits. Jewelry boxes are unlocked, not to honor her, but to turn her into a copy. And then comes the first official banquet. She enters, dressed in a gown that belonged to the king's mother. The room falls silent. Courtiers glance at the portrait, then at her, then back again. The resemblance is uncanny. Not admiration, imitation. She smiles stiffly, but her knuckles whiten around the goblet. Historians still argue whether this was daily routine or only for ceremonies. Was she constantly dressed as his mother, or was it more symbolic? Accounts differ, but the effect was the same. She became a living stand-in for the dead. Here's the fringe rumor. Even her perfume was dictated. The same jasmine and amber his mother once wore. Imagine walking into your own chambers at night and smelling like someone else because your husband insists on it. The queen is polite in public, but in private, you can almost hear her thoughts. I'm not her. I will never be her. Still, the palace ignores that truth. The king beams with pride, thinking he has recreated the perfect household. Courtiers mutter, servants whisper, but no one dares intervene. The wedding was supposed to begin her reign as queen. Instead, it marked the start of her life as a shadow. Asterisk, asterisk. The next mornings confirm what the queen feared. Servants bring not new gowns, but preserved relics from the late queen's wardrobe. They are carefully brushed, refitted, and held out to her like sacred garments. The king doesn't request, he expects. Wear this, he says, as if it's the most natural thing in the world. She obeys at first. What choice does she have? The court watches closely. When she enters the hall dressed in another of his mother's gowns, the resemblance makes people gasp. Same neckline, same veil, even her walk adjusted to mimic the painting on the wall. The king beams proudly, as if he has resurrected the past. The queen smiles stiffly, trapped in another woman's skin. Clothes in those days carried weight far beyond fashion. Gowns showed loyalty, wealth, even politics. Here's your quirky fact. In Spain, some queens banned their ladies-in-waiting from copying their clothes just to stay unique. This queen has no such luxury. Her entire wardrobe is a hand-me-down identity. The charade spreads to every corner of life. At feasts, she sits beside the king, dressed exactly as the portrait above them. Guests whisper, comparing the living woman to the painted ghost. At ceremonies, musicians play the late queen's favorite songs, turning every event into a reenactment. Even her gestures are dictated: how to tilt her chin, how to raise her goblet. The king adjusts her posture with his hand, saying, "She smiled like this." Historians still argue whether this was full-time or only for major occasions. But the symbolism mattered. Each time the queen appeared in his mother's clothes, she reinforced the dynasty's past more than its present. And then comes the rumor. He had her portrait painted too, but ordered the artist to make her look like his mother. Imagine sitting for hours only to see your own face replaced by someone else's features. It wasn't art. It was erasure. The courtiers adapt, as always. They praise her resemblance, toast the continuity of the dynasty, and act as though nothing is strange. But in the kitchens and corridors, whispers grow sharper. Does he even know her name? How long can she live like this? Behind closed doors, the queen shows her frustration. Some nights she tears the gowns off, pacing barefoot, muttering in her own language, "I am me, not her." But the next day, she's dressed again, turned into the mirror of a ghost. The king believes he has rebuilt his perfect household. The queen knows she's being erased, and you, watching from the edge of the hall, see clearly the silks of the dead are heavier than chains. Asterisk asterisk by now. The palace lives in two realities, the one where everyone praises the king, and the one where everyone whispers about him. You follow the queen through the corridors and feel the tension in every glance. Servants lower their voices when she passes. Courtiers smirk behind goblets, then hide the smile when the king looks their way. Everyone knows, but no one dares say it aloud. In the kitchens, gossip boils louder than the stew. Another of her gowns again, one servant mutters, "He's gone mad." Another answers, or maybe he thinks he can trick death. Jokes flicker, then fade quickly, because even walls might betray you here. At banquets, the act continues. The queen appears in another replica dress, another hairstyle copied from the portrait above them. Nobles pretend to admire, but their eyes dart back and forth, checking the resemblance like a cruel game of spot the difference. The king doesn't notice. He beams, convinced the illusion is perfect. The queen notices. She feels the weight of every whisper, every sideways glance. In public, she smiles and nods. In private, she crumbles. Some nights, she dismisses her ladies early and sits alone at her mirror. She pulls the gown from her shoulders, mutters to herself, and paces barefoot. "I am me, not her." Her defiance is small, but it's all she has. And slowly she starts resisting in quiet ways, a ribbon tied in her own color, a fan held across her face too long, a posture not quite aligned with the king's demands. Small rebellions, almost invisible but deliberate. Historians still argue whether this was strategy or survival instinct. Either way, she wasn't entirely erased. Here's a rumor. Once, she spilled wine on one of the dead queen's gowns and didn't apologize. Some say it was an accident. Others swear she smiled faintly as the stain spread. The king fumed, but she stood calm, as if making a point she would not play the part perfectly forever. Of course, her defiance only deepened the king's obsession. To him, this wasn't cruelty, it was devotion. In his mind, he was honoring his mother. To her, it was a prison. You picture her leaving a banquet one night, skirts trailing, head high but eyes burning. She passes the portrait again and stares at it, not with respect, but with anger. For a moment, you imagine her whispering, "You've taken everything from me." Then she turns sharply and disappears into the dark corridor, leaving the ghost behind. The palace now feels like a stage set for one long performance. Every banquet, every procession, every public appearance, another chance to show the queen dressed as the dead. But by this point, the story itself begins to splinter. Some chroniclers insist the queen was forced into this role daily. Others say it only happened during ceremonies. Historians still argue which version is true. What no one doubts is the effect. The court lived under a ghost shadow, and this isn't the only case of rulers crossing the line between memory and madness. You think of Caligula, the Roman emperor who supposedly wanted to make his horse a consul. Was he serious or just mocking the Senate? Historians disagree, but the story stuck. Or even the terrible, whose grief for his murdered son boiled into paranoia and cruelty. Rulers obsessed with family ghosts were not new. Here's your quirky fact. In ancient Egypt, pharaohs sometimes married their sisters to keep the bloodline pure. Compared to that, dressing your wife as your mother feels bizarre but not unique. Strange rulers have always existed. At court, whispers spread. Carefully, a servant jokes that at least the king hasn't married a horse. A court poet slips metaphors into his verses about roses forced to bloom in winter. Even the common folk outside the palace make jabs. Buy the wrong gown at market, and you'll anger the king's ghost mother. Humor becomes survival. Politics sharpen the edge. Each time the queen appears in her mother-in-law's clothes, it signals continuity, stability, dynasty. To the king, it's propaganda as much as devotion. His message, the past still rules, and through it, his reign is unbreakable. Yet to others, it looks fragile, even laughable. Foreign ambassadors likely reported home. The kingdom is strong, but its ruler clings to ghosts. And then the rumor that captures it all. The queen once appeared in her own dress, not in costume. The king, furious, canceled the entire ceremony rather than let her be seen as herself. True or not, the image is telling his obsession was so brittle it couldn't survive a single thread out of place. The queen, meanwhile, became a silent symbol of resistance. To courtiers, she was not just a mannequin, she was a prisoner. To the people, she was a figure to pity, even admire. And as you follow her down the corridors, past torches and portraits, you realize the tragedy is no longer just hers. It belongs to the whole kingdom, trapped between memory and reality. The palace grows quiet. The music is gone, the feasts have ended, and only faint torchlight flickers against stone. You walk with the queen down the long hallway, every wall lined with the same face, the mother she is forced to become. The silence is heavy, and her footsteps echo as if the whole building is listening. She stops at one portrait. Her face is calm, but her breathing slows. You can almost hear the words she doesn't say, "I am not you." It is the truth at the heart of this story, and yet no one in her world is willing to accept it. What happens next is uncertain. Some historians believe she endured this role until the end of her days, fading into history as the woman who lived in another's shadow. Others suggest she carved out her own dignity, leaving small marks of defiance that the king could never erase. Either way, her survival itself became a kind of rebellion. Here's one last quirky fact. In medieval chronicles, queens were often praised simply for enduring hardship. They weren't remembered for ruling or reforming, but for bearing their fate with dignity. Perhaps that's exactly what this queen did. Not triumph, not freedom, but a quiet strength history couldn't fully erase. Step outside with her. For a moment, the gardens stretch under the night sky. Crickets hum softly, roses sway in the breeze, and the stars burn cold and indifferent. Out here, the portraits can't watch her. Out here, she breathes as herself. The world beyond the palace doesn't care about dynasties or obsessions. It just turns, steady and silent dot, and now the story softens. The torches fade, the corridors dissolve, and even the queen's shadow slips away into memory. The king, the mother, the silks, the whispers, all of it grows quiet. The strange tale becomes just that, a story carried on the edge of sleep dot, so let your eyes close, let the palace fade. No costumes, no portraits, no heavy expectations, just rest. Tonight, the night itself is yours, and it doesn't ask you to be anyone else. Asterisk, asterisk, asterisk.